Springboard Notch. What is that hole in old growth stumps? By Gary Ordog, MD. Okay, this lecture is entitled, What is a Springboard Notch? And what is a springboard? And I ask a lot of people, I haven't asked any actual loggers, but everyone I've asked, no one's given me a good answer. So here's what I'm telling you after having worked out here many years ago. So here's an ancient growth tree, probably 1,000 years old. It's about 10 feet across at the base, and it was obviously cut down up there, and so the diameter's at least over 30 feet, and now it's decaying, but it's been here. It was probably, this would have been chopped down or cut down with saws. Probably took a long time for several sawyers to cut it down, but probably in 1920, yes, that's when they clear cut this forest. And then you can see some of the burn on the trunk here and down underneath. There was a fire here apparently in 1929, and that left those charcoal scars there. But anyway, the lecture today is about this little notch. Or actually, it's a pretty big notch. It's about a foot long and was probably deeper when the bark was on the tree. But that's where the end of a board would go in, and then the sawyer would climb up on the board and use that with his saw to cut across this big tree and cut it down. So anyway, that's called a springboard that fits in there, and you would stand on it. The sawyer would stand on it, and so this is called a springboard notch. And all these old growth trees that have been cut down and left as stumps like this, you will see those springboard notches if they were cut down about a century ago, which this one was probably cut down exactly 100 years ago. And there's the springboard notch. It is now an old growth stump. It's very large. Okay, thank you. Over and out. Here is an old photo from the 1920s from Golden Ears Park. This is clear cutting the old growth in Alouette. 1920. This is Abernathy Logging Company, and that is a springboard or a couple springboards in action with the loggers working on them. And as you can see, they're stuck into the springboard notches that have been cut into the side of the old growth timber. Huge stumps tucked away in the amongst the young trees are all that remained of the original forests of the lower Alouette Valley. These giant Douglas firs and red cedars were hand-logged in the 1920s and 1930s. The notches on the stumps mark the location of the springboards that the loggers stood on to chop and saw the trees. Here's an old notch visible. This was from 1920, as that was probably the time forensically the tree was cut down. The notch was made 1920. As the fire shows charcoal inside the notch, the fire was in 1929. Now this stump was too low for a notch. A person could stand and cut at saw level without using a notch and a springboard. But you can see the problem with this, and the problem with a lot of these trees is that they were hollow in the center at the bottom. So the good wood was higher up. Also, it was much broader at the bottom, and so if you went up higher to the good wood, it was much less sawing involved. And here again, you can see the tree is hollow down low. It's not good lumber at this level. Same with this one, the springboard let them cut higher up where the good wood was located. Good wood was higher up, as noted there. This was cut in 1920 and burned in the major forest fire of 1929. Again, these are all at Golden Ears Park around Alouette Lake. Here's an old 1920s photograph from the Abernathy Logging Company and shows the old-time springboard notches in an old-growth western red cedar stump. Okay, here's a couple of springboards in action, and you can see the loggers using their axes to cut down the tree. Here's another old photograph from 1920, and you can see the loggers are on two springboards and using a crosscut saw. No power tools were available or used at this time. Here's an old growth tree that filled up a whole train. So the logs are so large on some of the old growths of over 1,000 to 2,000 years old that they could fill up a train. Here is in Alouette Park, the Abernathy train carrying logs from the park in 1920, and again this was all in the area of Golden Ears Park. The Abernathy Lougheed Logging Company was the company that did all of the old growth logging, clear-cut logging in the area. Now this is an excellent photograph. This was from the Alouette Lake area. This is George Abernathy, stands in front of a 114-inch diameter slab of western red cedar in this 1923 photograph. The slab was shipped to England for the British Empire expedition in the 20s. Please help to keep the old growth alive. Here's a current stump of old growth western red cedar located on the hike to Lower Falls in Golden Ears Park. Here is Alouette Lake, a nice serene picture of the lake filled with water, pristine lake filled with water, or so it looks. But one would never know what is underneath until they actually had to drain the lake a couple years ago, and we were able to go out and walk across the lake while it was empty, and here's an old growth stump. So there's a lot of old growth stumps on the bottom of the lake, but you never see them because the lake is filled with water. And so it becomes a deep, dark secret that this was an old growth forest with a man-made lake filled with water, which they call a reservoir. So the whole bottom is filled with these old growth stumps, which also have these springboard notches in them. Anyway, this to me is kind of sad. I hate to see any old growth timber go, as they are magnificent trees. When the reservoir is full, no one knows the truth. So, in fact, I do like old growth. I wish there was more around. There's none left in Golden Ears Park, at least where I hike. And thank you for your support, showing some of my documentation here. And here's a textbook I wrote and edited, Management of Gunshot Wounds. Here's another textbook I helped write and edit, Ellen Horn's Medical Toxicology. And I am board certified by the American Board of Emergency Medicine for the past 35 years. And including one of my residencies was at Martin Luther King Jr. General Hospital, the County of Los Angeles. And I have received numerous awards and certifications over the years. So please press on my caricature